Morning everyone, we'll resume the hearing of submissions on Dunedin's draft future development strategy, and this morning we're hearing from Ka Runaka, and we're going to commence proceedings with the karakia.
Morena, koutou katoa, ko tēnei karakia mō tēnei wāhanga, mō tēnei rā. Mai e te tipu, mai e te tāwhito, mai e te kāhui o ngā ariki, mai e te tāwhiwhi o ngā atua ui takina te Māori ko te Māori. Āhua no, kei runga nei taura, kei runga nei tauira, kia tau te Māori, kei runga tēnei kaupapa, uhi, wero, haramai te toki haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Well, thank you very much for that, and again we extend our welcome to you. Perhaps I'll hand over to you in a minute to introduce your team to us and to make your presentation to us, but I'll just say what I've said to all the submitters. Thank you very much for pre-circulating your written material. That's very helpful. We've read that, so you don't need to read out anything that's been pre-circulated, but you are very welcome to highlight key points for us, and in particular if you're able to respond to the recommendations that have been put to us by the officers in their recommendation report. I note they did address a large number of your submission requests and responded to most of them positively, not all of them, so if you're able to comment on that, that would be helpful. But otherwise, Mr. Ellison, I'll hand over to you to introduce your team and then present to us as you see fit. Are you happy with, would your preference be that we wait till we hear from all of your speakers and then ask questions, or to ask questions of each speaker as they speak? What's your preference?
Probably to have them all.
Sorry?
Have them all prepared, or do them at the end would probably be the preference. Thanks.
It's absolutely fine by us, so you proceed and we'll save our questions until the end of your combined presentations.
Kia ora, ngā mihi. Thank you for the welcome and for the introduction to the hearing. I'm Edward Ellison. I'm the upoko of Te Runga o Tākau, if I'm right.
Kia ora tātou. Kai te tātou kahau te mihi hei whakatuwhiroa te atu nei hui. Kia ora to everyone. I'm Marpo Ellison, chairperson of Kāti Raparunaki Pukaraki and representative of our Rangatu Te Rangaitahu.
Thank you for that. Sorry to interrupt. These microphones are tricky, so you need to. There's a little button on the bottom of each microphone, and when you press it, it turns your one on and it turns the other ones off. So,
ora mai.
Yeah.
I did think I had that right. And my name is Marpo Ellison. I'm the chairperson of Kāti Raparunaki Pukaraki and representative of our Rangatu Te Rangaitahu. Kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ka mihi nui kia koutou. Ko Michael Bathgate toko ingoa. I'm a senior planner at Okaha.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Yvonne toko ikoa, and I'm an intermediate planner at Okaha.
Kia ora. So, speaking to my submission, evidence, it's centred really around the future strategy that Dunedin seeks to develop, but want to impress upon the panel, commissioners, the importance of the Otako Native Reserve to our hapu, to our futures. Originally it was land set aside from the sale of the Otako block. It was intended that there would be tenths of every land allotment parcel of land also allocated to our people so they would grow with the future economy. That never happened. The reserves we had were insufficient. Our people were required to live on those reserves and sustain themselves on small holdings. They became much more reliant on the harbour in the sea fishery because the access also to Mahika Kai was cut off. So what they had thought they were entering into did not occur, and that gave rise to the Ngaitahu claim. Started in 1849. There were about a dozen hearings, commissions, inquiries from 1869 right through till 1980s to try and resolve those issues. Then they were thwarted by change of governments, withdrawal of funds, in just a long drawn-out process which drew on all our people's resources to maintain the energy. So what I'm hoping to impress upon you is it's not just a block of land down there that we happen to live on. There's a whole history, broken promises, and the importance of understanding that in the way that the Dunedin manages their future strategy going forward. The land that was reserved was then divided up in 1868 into small petitions under the Murray Land Court law, designed to remove that land from Māori. That's what that law was about. And so we had, in our case, we had long, narrow reserves, sections, so that people could access the harbour to get their kaimoana, because they were reliant on useless for dairy farming. 2-3 kilometre long sections, 400 metres wide, just didn't work. So, I'm just saying that's where we came from. Hence, our people built our first meeting house, established the marae and built a meeting house called Te Mai, Tamariki, the work of the children, so that they could meet, convene and work out how they were going to address their situation. Halfway through that, or in the early part of 1900s, there were lands allocated to try and address this issue, but it was wasteland in the most inaccessible parts of the South Island. People never could use them. So they continued on, and ultimately we ended up getting our issues heard. So in a sense that defined our hapu really. Through that adversity we developed a type of leadership that continued every generation and passed on the legacy to each generation. It took 5 generations to get a resolution. It also, being down the end of the peninsula, kept us in superb isolation in some respects, and there was quite a unique community and culture developed down there, and it was very, I suppose, privileged to be brought up down there in a respect. But we didn't have water, we didn't have sewage, and we didn't have tar seal for a long time. And believe it or not, it was the tar seal that secured that culture for so long. Once the tar seal was put in, it was just when I was born, but I hear from the elders that we lost that culture and it became a very much more visited place. So while we're asking for our reserve to be recognised so we can still live there, develop our papakainga and have our whānau live on their land within their hapu, amongst their whānau and relations, we're also asking that we be included in the infrastructure that the city develops. So we have fit for purpose infrastructure for our people to live on their lands and maintain their culture. It's unique what we have to do in terms of being treaty partners. It's only through that base that we can do and hold on to our customs, our values, and exercise our functions. If we were dispersed through the communities, I would suspect that that would be much harder. But we've maintained that enclave, and it's actually been quite important for Ngāi Tahu, in my perspective. There are a number of communities like that who are incredibly critical to the functioning of the tribe, to hold on to our rangatiratanga. So it's much more important than water, road, sewage, and keeping the health of our harbour, which was also affected, even though our people were reliant on it. The sewage discharge that happened for so long, dredging, development, reclamation, affected our kaimoana and the health of that harbour. So that is, I'm impressing upon you as well, the impacts that have occurred that were not what we were guaranteed and promised. So I think I've summarised, what's in my submission, Mr. Chair, and I might stop there and pass the rākau to the next person. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. The summary Edward has eloquently and insightfully given, it really resonates strongly with myself as well, and so I don't really need to traverse what Edward has covered. It's as true for the Ōtākau Reserve as it is true for every other reserve in our takiwā. I also don't like dwelling a lot on the Malay of the past. I prefer to be future focused, but it is an inevitable fact that we are confronted by the legacy of what I call the colonisation processes, which have played out within the local government as well as central government decision making over 100 plus years now, and we are looking future focused, no doubt about it, and we want to empower our people to utilise their lands. Many remaining Maori landowners don't have 15 hectares to meet that threshold, for example, to be able to build on it. So they languish on and drive past it quite often. They're looking over at their piece of land, but knowing they can't do much with it, really. So we have an intent of empowerment of our villages and of our people who remain on that land. Hello, my story coming from a little flu bug. I think what I've written in my submission, or I think I've sort of covered loosely the intent of what I've written, which is about ongoing impacts of previous decision making historically, and I'm reflecting that we are confronted by that and still feel the legacy of those decisions on our reserve lands, and that we want to be empowered to utilise those lands in a far more equitable and meaningful way, economically, culturally, socially. Kia ora tātou, kia ora koe, te rākau.
Kia ora, Matt. Mr. Chair, there was a third piece of cultural evidence from Brendan Flack, who is unable to be here today. He's out of town. My colleague Yvonne has been involved with the DCC's Three Waters ISP program and worked quite closely with Brendan in that. So I think she's going to make a couple of remarks around Brendan's evidence, which really touched on Three Waters and the wastewater treatment plants in the northern schemes. And then she'll probably hand back to me. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Yeah, kia ora. So I've worked, I guess, with I've sat on the board for the Integrated System Planning Program, DCC's program, and worked together with Runaka on this program since 2021. And I guess 2022 things started picking up, and I guess the main thing that Brendan refers to in his evidence on the ISP, the key point there is on the Northern Scheme study, which is specifically Warrington, Waikoaiti and Seacliff, although Seacliff kind of sits out on a sort of sub-project on its own. I guess the main thing through the Northern Schemes since 2022, when we started really getting involved in it, is the fact that the plants are both in inappropriate locations, with Warrington on the sand spit between the Blueskin Bay and the ocean, and Waikoaiti wastewater treatment plant on the Waikoaiti beach. So what we've been trying to reiterate through the ISP program is that I know that the DCC had proposed a lot of changes to improve effluent quality, but what we've kind of been pushing and working together with the ISP team to understand that regardless of effluent quality in terms of mana whenua values and the aspirations and efforts, I guess, of Puketeraki in that area in terms of restoring those traditional mahi kakai areas, it's just not appropriate to be discharging effluent anywhere near these areas. So we've been working with the ISP team on this, and that's kind of the main, I guess, messaging here. And I know it's quite hard for people to understand why that is not appropriate when Western science and I guess engineering solutions say that it is. But we have worked together with them and put in, I guess, what you would call guiding principles. So that's Te Mano Te Wai and Tikaka and Kawa to hopefully explain why that is from a mana whenua perspective. So I think that's the main thing from me, Michael. So back to you.
Kia ora, Von. So I think I'm probably the person at Ōkaha that's had the most involvement with the future development strategy to date on a sort of staff-to-staff level, although Yvonne had the joy of pulling the submission together due to me being overseas at the time. But firstly, I'd like to acknowledge both the DCC and ORC for our involvement in the project to date. It's been, I think, a really fruitful experience. And I think from our perspective as Ōkaha staff members trying to bring the Rūnaka perspective and values into this process, I think you can see that throughout the document, particularly with a focus on the te tao, the natural environment. So you can see that not only in the hapu statement and the values and intent that are sort of written there, but also things like the strategic directions, you know, some of their focus on improving, restoring and improving the natural environment. I think a lot of the work around blue-green networks is still to come, but I think Rūnaka definitely see a big role moving forward in that. And also just a focus on Mahikikai, sort of trying to restore the Mahikikai resource. I think in terms of the response to the Rūnaka submission, as you say, Mr. Chair, it's been, I think the Rūnaka submission has been well met in just about all cases, so I'd like to acknowledge and mihi to the council staff in that regard. I guess as both Edward and Matapura allude to, the sort of overarching issue, as well as improvement of te tao and the effects of urban development on te tao more broadly, the big kaupapa obviously is the native reserves. And both the cultural evidence of Edward and Matapura touch on that. It's difficult, I guess, to summarise whatever 150, 180 years now of experience in terms of what has happened, what was promised and what hasn't been delivered to areas that were, and I think it's worth reiterating, areas that were set aside for settlement but never properly enabled on an equitable basis. I think we look at the overarching planning framework for the native reserves and we can see a direction of travel which is really encouraging. I think our submission talked about the regional policy statement, policy that is enabling of mana whenua use of native reserves for settlement broadly, not just residential use but more broad settlement and use of those areas as was intended. The decisions version that came out Easter Saturday, I think it was, is pretty much in line with what was in our submission, but yeah. So that's a sort of important policy direction for use of those native reserves. Because of where they are, they tend to be really restricted. You know, it's like planning soup in terms of sort of overlays and restrictions on those areas, and that's really stifled for a long time mana whenua to be able to use those areas, along with the fact that a lot of them are zoned rural and there's sort of restrictions associated with that as well. The DCC has undertaken to initiate a review of planning provisions relating to the native reserves and mana whenua use of native reserves. I think that's kicking off in the next financial year, so that's really heartening and look forward to being involved with that. So I guess that just leaves the infrastructure issues still at play. I mean, I think in terms of the work that's been done through the ISP program, a lot of it is scheduled and is in train, and it's just probably a case both in terms of Three Waters provision and I think particularly in terms of the Outer Peninsula, the Peninsula connection. It's just a case of sort of timing of those and asking for some things to be brought forward to meet the challenges that are faced by runaka out in those areas, and to address the sort of past iniquities of provision, I guess. So just in closing, I guess a challenge, a whittle, as I see it. One is that I think the statement of hapu values and intent that Runaka worked on and have included in the document really sets out the sort of guiding philosophy and values and intent in relation to native reserves and to tile more broadly, but the challenge is that it just doesn't sit there as a nice sort of piece of prose at the front end of the future development strategy, that it sort of gets brought down into planning and infrastructure subsidiary documents. And then probably the other challenge, as I see it, and which Edward I think in particular touched on as evidence, is that a treaty lens is brought to the decision making around planning and infrastructure provision moving forward. So thank you. I think we're happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ellison, to you and your team. There was a very concise and helpful summary of the evidence that's been presented, so we thank you for that. Now I'll just see if we have questions from the panel. Andrew, questions?
Thanks very much. Thank you for the joint submission. I suppose first thought came to my mind as quite a powerful submission, and particularly Brendan's, it didn't pull any punches, but that was just my initial thoughts. But as you can appreciate, I'm on a bit of a journey with understanding values and practices, kaitahu values and practices from a perspective, from a elected member's perspective. So don't take any of these questions the wrong way, but I want to just hone in on particularly the infrastructure aspects, the wastewater and the potable water and the Northern Water schemes, because I think it'd be useful just to have a little bit more of a conversation. And if we start with the wastewater, for example, and I see Brendan mentioned, and you have Yvonne as well, about Seacliff, and I hadn't noticed that in any of the other staff reports. So it's the 3 plants that are of concern. So I suppose my question is around if sites could be found beyond where those current discharges occur that, for example, weren't, or the land wasn't Crown land, for example, adjacent land that was perhaps owned privately. I immediately think of Waikawati. You've got a golf course close by. I'll just declare I haven't got an interest, and I'm not a member of the Waikawati golf course or the golf club. But what's your view on that approach going forward if these discharge areas were decommissioned, whether there could be an opportunity close by where you haven't got the same concerns around the sensitive nature of the land? Would that be a solution that would be acceptable?
I think that's entirely what Runaka are seeking. Land-based disposal that's not close to, waterways, not close to the coast, not close to mahikai habitat.
The treatment plant could be in situ, but there could be an extension to the discharge area. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I haven't been directly. I can't speak to that, but maybe Yvonne can, in terms of whether the whole treatment plant is sought to be moved.
I guess we've been working with ISP on what that would look like, so it would require us working together to, whether there was a combination of methods. I think the first thing in our mind was that the whole plant would be moved, including the discharge point, of course, but I am aware that there's a long-term options list that the ISP team have come up with, so we're in the process of looking at that actually at this point. So we have, yeah.
And just the other thing to mention to that is the situation where they both are and their sort of long-term risks from sea level rise and coastal inundation. I think there really is a view that the whole plants and dispersal fields should be moved.
Thank you. With regards to the water scheme, the Waikawati water take for obviously Dunedin City Council, and there's an adjacent landowner is also the one at the top end for the Stoneburn rural scheme, which is in the Waitaki district. But just with a focus on those schemes and the suggestion in the submission, and obviously the city have talked about this through the ISP process with you, is around removing that take or those takes, and for the benefit obviously of the estuary and the health of the river in general, which is admirable, and I think everyone would agree with that. What is your approach with regards to if the solution was that the takes remained and water storage was an option where water was taken during higher flows, for example? I'm just trying to tease out what the view would be if that was an option that could be a solution.
Unfortunately, we don't really have a response to that, and I think that was something that was to be discussed as part of the program, and yeah, if we could come back to you on that. Yeah.
Thank you. Having read your submission and read the recommending officer's report and listened to you today, so overall, it's probably a question directed more at you, Michael. You're overall happy with the FDS and with what the changes that the staff have recommended at this point. And so a lot of the things that you've talked about today, especially like in detailed terms with wastewater and potable water, is more in the detail in the implementation plan or in other documents going forward. I guess what I'm asking is that overall you're happy with the changes that are going to be that have been suggested to be made to the FDS, and there's nothing more in particular that you're asking of today to be changed or added in?
I think succinctly that is true in terms of the content of the FDS. I think we're pretty happy with where it is. I think the only thing is the timing of particularly the peninsula, the outer peninsula, the Three Waters and the peninsula connection, Three Waters upgrades and peninsula connection. That would be the only thing that I believe Runaka would still be pushing for.
So in terms of timing, we can either do 1 to 3 years, 3 to 10, or 10 to...
That's correct. I think I just realised I didn't have my mic on when I answered the last question. So to repeat, yeah, I think we're Runaka very happy with where the document has landed, and the only changes still sought that I'm aware of relate to the servicing, Three Waters servicing on the outer peninsula, and to the peninsula connection being brought forward into the 3 to 10 year time frame.
Kia koutou. I don't see it as a conflict, but just noting that I whakapapa to both Runaka represented today, and also that I didn't participate in any of the discussions or the preparation of any of the submissions that are currently in front of us. This is a question for both the Mr. Ellisons from each Runaka's perspective, and I'll start with regard to Otako. When you talk about our reserve, is that all Māori land beyond the Māori line?
Yeah, kia ora, Commissioner, when I'm talking about the Otako Reserve, yes, the Māori line that crosses around at Moipuku, you know where that is, the end of the golf course right over to Cape Saunders to the east.
And then the question of clarification, then throughout the draft it talks about provision of infrastructure and those sort of things for Māori reserve and pipeline and those sort of things. So is it your understanding that that is lead to all those pieces of Māori land beyond the Māori line?
Probably not really. Probably less than 50% of that land is in Māori ownership now. The challenges of holding on to that land under the various laws in the past and economics and what have you have resulted in that. Really referring to the harbour side, particularly, of the peninsula, where there are sections of land where there are multiply owned land with housing on it. Really looking in that below the line where I think there's ONLs and ONFs, wahi tupuna designations. So we're not talking about the tops of the hills or up on the farmland so much, but trying to cater for those areas that are suitable for papakainga. There's several whānau in the Runanga have no financial interest in this whatsoever. We're representing our hapu, but the actual interests belong to whānau on those particular blocks who whakapapatu and hold ownership in them. You know, some of them, like Te Raona, might have 2,000 owners, I don't know. It could be more. We are well aware of the issues they face, and we have a role to advocate as best we can in these forums to assist, enable, empower them to utilise their land, have their whānau live on the land, and not face the risk of, and this is a point I want to make here, the challenges of getting water there and sewage in the connection perhaps may impact on rates or the value of the land. That would immediately impact on the future as well of those lands. So it is a tricky matter to work through. What we're raising here in an RMA process is just but one hurdle. There are actually multiple other hurdles to actually make all of these visions come to fruition. Simply navigating the Māori Land Court, which is 2 years behind in its cases, in the laws of that, make multiply owned land and utilisation of it a challenge. So I don't want to understate the difficulties of making all of this work, but we believe that the City Regional Council have a duty to understand that and to apply themselves in a way that doesn't add to the significant challenge.
Matt, if you could respond. Kia ora. Thanks, Evan. Matt, if you could respond in a similar manner with regard to how you see Māori reserve land being applied under the FDS?
Kia ora, Commissioner. There are subtle differences between the Otago Reserve and the Waikwahi Native Reserve. We were lucky to be beneficiaries of a local rural water scheme in the 1960s, and so we had that overlay largely across the reserve. But many of the other issues which Edward has raised are equally pertinent to the Waikwahi Native Reserve and other reserves attached to Pukaraki. And so the papakaika provisions we're seeking, I think, really are fundamental to opening up that potential for the remaining Māori landowners, and also just make the point that again that we are not representing Māori, mandated to represent Māori landowners here today, but we certainly are aware of those issues which are faced by all Māori landowners.
Work that time. The next question is a Otago question, and several submitters over the proceedings so far have talked about safe connections between communities and cycleway on the Otago Peninsula, and just wanting to understand from Otago's perspective what it means for that piece of infrastructure to be completed between Harrington Point and Portobello.
We have, kia ora, thank you for that. I suppose we've been working with the city since the 90s when the initial road was sewage line was put in to extend sewage reticulation out to Mick Bay, Company Bay, Broad Bay, Portobello. And following on from that, and that was about getting, our interest was particularly getting sewage out of the harbour, and that happened ultimately. Post that, around about 2010s, entered into further discussion about the connection, which was more about the connection than the cycleway, particularly at the time, and it morphed into something else in terms of the cycleway. But the Portobello to Harrington Point was actually scheduled under the earlier plan to be completed before the Company Bay to Dunedin, or parts of that. And that was reversed. I cannot recall the exact year. I know it's on it's a current discussion at the City Council, but the order was reversed so that the areas closer to Dunedin could be completed first, and we agreed to that, or I, in fact, on behalf of the Runanga, did, on the proviso that we would get done in the order that they then had on that schedule. Somehow we've dropped off, and we have the most dangerous part of the road, particularly the corner, the corner of the Rock Corner. There, two buses cannot pass there. A truck and a car, you've got to be careful. It's quite dangerous. Narrow, and the tide, it's low, it hasn't been elevated, and it's quite often eaten away by sea, in the heavy sea. So it's dangerous, cars go into the water or have collisions. We are concerned for safety, but equally we have a high number of tourists coming down to go to Pukekura, Taiaroa Head. The marae is as busy as its bookings are almost, it's very hard to get a booking there. So we have a large number of people going to the marae as well. But the locals living there have got to traverse this road every day. And so I think it's totally inequitable for that part of the road not to be completed, and it's just another, adds to further what I'd said earlier in my submission to you about it's sort of contrary to what we were guaranteed when we sold the land, or Taco Block, and we were to be we're provided with the reserves, but we were to be provided with the schools, hospitals, but also the opportunities at Equitable to grow with the developing economy. So it's just a reminder, further reminder of those issues that our previous generations faced. So I'm concerned. I live on the Dunedin side of that road, so I don't have to travel it every day, but I am concerned for the people who do.
So thanks for that response. There was one question remaining from that response is timing. So we're considering 1 to 3 years, 1 to 10, or 10 to 30 years. When would you want to see that happen?
Obviously, I'd go for 1 to 3, so yeah, that would be our submission. How difficult that may be, but clearly the latter one, the longer one, that is a long time to be navigating a road that's getting busier all the time. It's not getting any quieter. Yeah, thanks.
And final question, and this also comes out of the officer's response to submissions. Throughout the submission of mana whenua, you've spelt Taiari, T-A-I-A-R-I, as the cultural experts in this matter. Is this how you'd like to see it spelled in council documents, including the FDS?
Kia ora. Commissioner, thank you for that. Yes, the Taiari is the correct spelling, the way that we have it in the submission. The Taieri has no meaning. Taiari relates to the fact that it's a tidal, the bottom part of the river is tidal, and reflects to the way that current works. We are very strong on authenticity, and when we know the facts, we urge that that be recognised in the way that organisations like the councils apply those and refer to those names. It's important to us, but we also think it's something that's important surely for all the community to understand what might be in fact the authentic spelling of and meaning of a name like that.
Thank you. Kia ora. I've got probably about a dozen questions, so I think I'll just sort of randomly go through them. And I'll probably start with the Peninsula Connection and then head on, and probably infrastructure services to Ōtākau in general. And I do want to touch on the ISP as well, because as far as I can tell, there's no governance component to the ISP. And as the Chair of Infrastructure, I'm actually unaware of the activities that go on there. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. As you've described the Peninsula Connection funding changes and focus changes, I think that you pretty accurately described them, and I'm sure the intent that it would be finished all the way to the end when the orders changed, and then basically budget blowouts and Whakatahi's unwillingness to continue with any further funding is why it finished there. I would completely agree with you that from your perspective, it looks like stuff gets done to a certain distance and then always peters out at that point. So I want to ask you what you think of our relationship to our treaty obligations and then dealing with how we normally deal with population density. Because I think that often what's happening out at Ōtākau is that we get to a population density rule and that's where we stop. But you're saying, and I'm pretty much in agreement with I think what you're saying, is that we've got more obligations than just that, and that we need to give effect to our obligations. So therefore the mechanisms that we use to calculate investment are not relevant to this relationship, and we need to get another relevance associated with that.
Yes, I think that's right, Commissioner. Put it this way, for us who live there, it's the centre of our universe, and it's how we maintain our cohesion, our haputanga, and because we're there, we live and breathe that ahua of that place. So I think there's a particular importance from us as Runanga. We know if our people weren't living there, and they couldn't, and they had to spread all over, our effectiveness in terms of upholding our function as a runaka, providing that cohesion and all of those functions that we do as a hapu, our cultural activities and what have you, and just that identity become more challenged. And so we think that's the heartbeat of our hapu, is reliant on the ability to maintain a nucleus, at least, of the hapu who are there, domiciled on their land. Not all of the whānau who live on their land get engaged. That's fine. That's their choice. And that's the same everywhere. But if there's enough of a cohort, then we have a capacity, as we've in the past maintained that cohesion and kept going forward and produced the type of people we need to reflect and uphold all of our cultural duties for ourselves and with our partners and with our community. So to me it's, yes, absolutely, you're right, it's more than just another parcel of land where we can look at density and what's appropriate. There's actually a deeper meaning to what we're trying to achieve by having people resident who whakapapa to that place, who live on their land, can live on their land and pass on, and we know we've got future generations. We're more certain that the future generations will be there and able to uphold the traditions, customs and mana rangatiratanga that we aspire to do. Kia ora.
And I note that all the reserves are effectively rural, but in a presentation you gave to the council a year or two ago, you said that at the time of the sales, you were also looking for reserves around where the Vauxhall area is now, which of course would have evolved into an urban reserve, and we would have had a very different understanding of the difference between objectives and population density. Because I think we are dealing with the uniqueness of the fact that the historical way it played out, those reserves are in relatively isolated areas and low population areas, and that probably needs to be addressed too, in terms of it has to be a deliberate, disproportionate investment that goes against the underlying calculations that normally go to make these decisions. I'm looking at the 1 to 3, 1 to 10 and 10 to 30 on the harbour connection and finishing it. I don't have the number in front of me, but it won't be less than 10 million probably to do that last part. And if we can't get Whakatahi to give us some financial assistance, then that will be completely on the ratepayer. And I'm just leaving that open that's just a matter of fact. Crown infrastructure. So there was a Crown infrastructure type fund that came up, which was the Shovel Ready Fund, and I would have to say that in the end we did not push that connection properly under that fund, and I think if we had, we probably could have got it. It would be nicer for everybody if central government was contributing in some way or another to this as well, even if we decide to commit ourselves to going ahead on it, would basically speeding it up the 1 to 3 or at the top end, at the fast end of the 1 to 10. How do we go ahead working in such a way that we work together so that we can get a little bit of arm twisty out of Wellington to see if they can help us with finishing this?
Yes, Commissioner, I think that's a good idea, and there probably are prospects that may open. We probably didn't join hands when that provincial growth and other opportunities were there in the past. I think we have to be alert and work together when those opportunities might present themselves in the future, and I think one particular minister's got a bucket of money he's going around looking for homes for. I don't know, we may be able to put up an argument, a case, but yes, we need to be working together on those opportunities. Certainly happy to.
And then the next question, it gets back to Papakāinga and basically a changing in the district plan's attitude to minimum lot size and other such things to allow us to start to achieve the objectives of the Renaka when it comes to members of the Renaka living in the reserve area.
Yes, there are actually sections of land with lots on rather than surveyed sections, I think, is how it currently works down there. So it's quite, yeah, it's a bit out of the norm. So yes, we have to be, yes, we have to look at those peculiarities and see how that can work. To survey that land would ultimately cause the owners to have to sell it.
Now I just want to go to water and sewer provisions, and then I'll move over to Puketeraki next, but I think it's easy just to stay in one area at the start. You mentioned impact on rates, so there is a water rate that sits with the rate once you're connected. Are you assuming, or is it assumed that if water and sewer does get connected, that the water rate would then go to the person's rate, or not? Is there any thought there might be a different treatment?
I'm definitely thinking different treatment. What I'm hoping to avoid and is to avoid a situation like i.e. having to survey into sections and do and all of that infrastructure if it was the normal course of events. These thousand owners in one block of land, ultimately in paying rates and all. Look, potentially if we had a situation where it pushed them off the land, ultimately, and I haven't done the figures, I haven't looked at it, but has always been my thinking. We need to preserve their title. We want them to be able to utilise the land, but not at the cost of then them having to do something to pay for it all, i.e. sell half that or sell it all and break up that community, i.e. we want to have a functioning community, hapu community at the end of it.
So you wouldn't, Okay, if there's an extension of services out past the normal line, if it was going to a general community in the city, there may be a targeted water rate go with it, or it may be decided to be absorbed in the total infrastructure spend, and therefore the connections just occur, but then you get rated because now you're connected. I think it's reasonable to assume that that would be the minimum relationship you'd expect, that basically the city would just extend its activities further out, but there wouldn't be a targeted water rate for that extension. In fact, the reason it got extended was because of our obligations to Te Tiriti, and therefore we're taking and absorbing a cost that we probably wouldn't normally absorb if we were extending it to Allenton. In fact, we didn't when we extended activities to there. Is that the first part you'd be expecting? And then I guess the question then would be ongoing after the connection, what would your expectation be in terms of it? At the moment, you get hit with a rate because you are connected and you're getting those services. It's not that you are now got to pay for having got it brought to you, but now that it is connected to you, that's the annual fee.
Oh, well, my overarching interest is that as long as it is not precipitous, it causes precipitous actions, that what you're raising is for the individual people benefiting from it, then how they might pay for that on an annual basis. But all I'm saying is understand that what I'm talking about is that we don't cause precipitous action that defeats the whole purpose of what we're trying to achieve.
No, that's very clear, thanks. And now, Matapura, if I can move on to you, thank you. I want to start with the wastewater treatment plants. And as I said, I'm not actually, I haven't been briefed on exactly where everything's going, although I have a rough idea of where it's going. And just correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation. Warrington and Waikawaiti plants are both getting their end of life, and are certainly with the nitrate discharges, Warrington's just not going to be able to meet it in the future. So there is some temporary upgrades to partially deal with the ORCs with our failure to meet the debt requirements in the ORC's settings. But ultimately, the Warrington treatment plant will be eventually decommissioned and then dismantled and removed because it's too close to sea level and it's sitting in particularly sensitive sites as well. And I think to some extent that's not as time dependent for Waikawaiti, but in fact that plant itself will eventually also get decommissioned and removed. So what we're looking at in the whole coastal area is either two plants or one very big plant that will be connected, and they will have to be at a height that they're well protected from sea level rise. And there is probably will be our first expectation to do discharge to land once those plants are activated, plant or plants. Is that fairly accurate?
Kia ora, Commissioner, I'll defer to Yvonne on that one.
Kia ora, Commissioner. Yeah, that's correct. So that's definitely what we've been pushing for, because certainly from Mana Whenua's perspective, both plants are not in appropriate locations where they currently are. Yeah.
To advance onto that, because we've got two really big plants that we've got to be thinking about into the future, which is Tahuna and Green Island, that are currently discharging to marine as well. I believe the OIC is starting to move somewhere around 2040 to discharge to land, but I'm not sure exactly what that number is. But should we also, as we're establishing our future strategies here, be taking into account that we will probably also be expected to discharge to land from those plants or whatever replaces them in the future?
Was that a question, or were you looking?
It's a question actually, and how that will play out with planning in the future.
Yeah, I don't think Tahuna and Green Island specifically being discussed through the ISP program, but I think it's within sort of guiding tikanga for Mana Whenua that land-based disposal is the preference. I think it's set out in the iwi management plan, and it's a clear preference.
And just confirming really, just to make sure that everybody in the room does hear that, in fact, that why we're dealing with those northern plants at the moment, the next set of plants that will probably be really relevant will be those two big ones. And now the provision of potable water to the area. So the main draw is from the Waikawaiti River, and it clearly, to anybody who knows anything about that draw, it's marginal at the moment, to be honest, and it's certainly, we are seeing less and less rain in the southeast Otago area, which means the rivers are hitting lower and lower levels every year. We're even hitting it at Deep Stream and Deep Creek as well. I want to follow up on Councillor Noon, or Commissioner Noon's question about what's the thought about water in that part of the city as it relates to our main treatment plants are obviously Mount Grant and Southern, and basically Mount Grant is taking in all the water that comes from the two big draws up at Deep Creek and Deep Stream. We only have a 150 millimetre pipe over Leith Saddle, which is nowhere near capable of dealing with supplying potable water to the north coast. Am I right then that the council, or from your perspective of what you're seeing, is it that we are facing basically a shortage of ability to provide drinking water to that community, and that our current main source of water is the Waikawaiti River, and that in fact again, if we are to follow our relationship through to the end, we will ultimately end up withdrawing from that river, especially during the summer. Is there any thought about anything like that we would withdraw completely, or we'd do something which I think Andrew was kind of heading towards, would be that in times of high flood or very high flow, there'd be withdrawal to a holding reservoir, and then there'd be no draw below a much, much higher line for protecting the river? Because if it's not that, then the alternative is we're going to have to bring in a very, very big pipe over Leith Saddle. Are those the two parameters we're looking at?
Yes, I'm aware that these discussions have been taking place through the ISP program. Obviously, at the start of it, Brendan made very clear that Puketaraki's preference was to withdraw the water take from the Waikawaiti. But I've since actually stepped out of the ISP and Three Waters work since last year. But when I was still in there, I know that the council was undertaking some yield assessments or investigations into possible groundwater sources in the area. I'm not actually sure where that has come to since stepping out. But I know that the discussion for that water source is still ongoing between us and the ISP team.
So then my last question is timing. I think a lot of that's in the 10 to 30. Would it be better that some of it was back in the 1 to 10?
Definitely.
I'm really looking at the water one, to be honest, as much as I think the focus has been on the sewer treatment plants, and I do think that there's been focus on that. I'm wondering, has there been sufficient focus on the supply of water and also the relationship between the two, that once you supply water, you end up with more sewage?
Yeah, that has been taking place concurrently to the wastewater discussions. But as I said, I'm not sure where they got to with those groundwater investigations, but I know it's still ongoing. Yep.
And just a transport question. Public transport to the north coast. I know that the Waikawaiti Coast Community Board has been advocating for more and more activity and more public transport to that area. Do you feel that Karatane is well served?
I don't use the service myself, but others tell me they would like further service delivery through across the day.
Leave it.
Kia ora, and just like to acknowledge your patience, which is, I think, been very humbly expressed here today. And if I look at the role of our every FDS must be informed by the following, and one is Māori, and in particular tangata whenua values and aspirations for urban development. And I just want to focus on the word aspirations, because I think it's been acknowledged that there are aspirations in the document. It's the timeframes of those aspirations, again, following on from the other points. And we've had a number of developers talk about the timeframes it takes to do developments, and I just want to reflect on that, the rather murkiness of developments for you is much more difficult given native land ownership, and acknowledge that in the aspirations you've got. So from my mind, there's you've got infrastructure, which is where we can make a difference. You've got planning, which may or may not provide for a mechanism for papakaika, and acknowledging the RPS is certainly, I think, empowered that more than in the past. The funding for you, if it's just to one site and one site can be charged water, that's one thing, but then you've got your funding for building on those native lands is much more difficult. Is that correct? Could you just articulate a bit about that?
It's very, very difficult to raise funds, borrow money from banks on Māori, multiply owned Māori land.
Are the moves given, I think, progress in understanding these issues, I would like to think, with either banks or Ngā Tahu having funding for that in a way that may overcome those? Because it's fine for us to say 1 to 3 years to get water or sewerage there, but if the hold-up is going to be actually the ability to do that development, I think we need to acknowledge that as well. And I want to empower as much as possible, but I'm just wondering if there are going to be still difficulties in that.
Kia ora, Commissioner. There's a mosaic of tenure, and if with the increase of multiplicity of ownership creates higher levels of complexity, but conversely there are sections which are more manageably owned by less people or singular people, so that actually makes it quite feasible to be able to move fairly fast.
Yes, Commissioner, if I could answer as well that some of the blocks have got trusts, well-established trusts, and are quite capable of moving things forward. And just to your question on the banks, there is a bank in New Zealand who has entered into an agreement with another iwi, I think it's Ngāti Whātua or Ngāpui, so there's work going on at that end of things as well to try and get those side of things working.
That's great. Look, that leads on to, presumably, if papakaika can be developed in these areas, that will free up other land in Dunedin, or not necessarily. Are you seeing these as residential homes that are lived in all of the time, and from whence will those people come? Will they be from people already living in Dunedin, or do you think it'll be whānau coming home?
I think if we get the conditions right, it will probably lead to whānau returning to their land. Most of the owners live possibly outside of the South Island.
Just, there's a couple of technical little mind things that I'm probably going down a rabbit hole on. On page, it's maybe for you, Michael, page 127, you talk about the South Coast having land alongside the Tairi River between Henley and Tairi Mouth was set aside in the 1800s for mana whenua. Now, I totally appreciate that that's in the South Coast because it talks about that long strip of native reserve. It isn't in the Outram Ellington Middlemarch section on page 111, and I'm just wondering whether it actually relates to both sites, potentially.
I don't have the document with the boundaries of those catchments split in front of me, but one of the trust owners is sitting to my right, so he could probably respond, but it does go right through toward Henley, doesn't it?
The Tairi block, Tari. Tari Block A, B and C, 1,900 acres. C is in this Clutha District Council area. A and B is in the Dunedin City Council area.
I'm not quite sure where those boundaries are either, but I just wanted to raise whether that there is an opportunity to be considering it extending not just on the south coast down the coastal side, but I think it goes quite a long way into what would be considered the Outram area.
So I can't really answer that off the top of my head without those maps in front of me, but yeah.
I appreciate that sometimes we have a very myopic view and don't realise that things happen outside of our boundaries, and I just want to check about, I see Berwick, and again, it's not an area that I just want to make sure that we've covered it off properly though. I'll come back to that Tari, I'll say on Tari land. So Tari at the moment, that land, you're not looking at any development rights, and totally get that, but given the timeframes that we're talking about, should there be scoping considered for that land use of any urban sort? I mean, I have the privilege of going down there with Stephen Bryant and having a look at that land, which was obviously very well used at one stage for occupation. And given that we're looking 30 years out, are you confirming that there is no need to be looking down there at the moment?
I couldn't be sure about some of that land, which is another whānau, but I'm a trustee for the bulk of the land that still remains in our land ownership. We don't see housing development in the immediate future as being a priority. But at the Henley end, that could be quite different.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
If I turn my mic on, I can. Through this process, we've also talked to block owners out at Purakanu and Long Beach, and I think there's pragmatic, probably with Tari Block as well, there's pragmatic view that they're a long way from reticulated services, and there's no realistic expectation that they'll be extended to those really outlying areas. But back to the planning provisions, I think there is hope that they'll be loosened up so that whānau can do things like stay on the land, hold events on the land, which currently those rural zone rules are quite restrictive in terms of some of those things, or undertake minor, activities, commercial, cultural activities on their blocks of land, which currently they are quite restricted from using.
No, and that's great. It's just that this does have a long life, and I given your patience, just wanted to check. And look, the other one is, and I'm just looking at figure 36, which is the Three Waters infrastructure improvements, and it talks about Berwick. Now, Berwick is right on the boundary of Dunedin City, and some very close to other interests you have with the, sorry, my Tereo always lets me down on this one, and I should have got it right, but I'm going to call it Sinclair Wetlands, and development there that's of no interest in or comment at the moment. I just wanted to check again because this is an aspirational 30-year document.
Particularly interested in restoration of that wetland. That's the main focus we have there for the foreseeable future. There is accommodation there, but that's for people come to work or stay there just as for security of the property. But no, there's no intention for any residential development there.
It's on the. I think the ORC people are used to turning their mics off, and this is a problem. We're constantly doing that. The amend 6.93, which is about the stormwater and wastewater discharges that have potential to enter the Taiari, and there's an agreement on that. I'm just wondering if it needs some specificity about which areas that are, because we've got Outram, Ellington and Middlemarch, which all could be that, and amongst others. And I'm just checking, is that about all of those schemes or any particular one. Is that relating to all of those schemes, that comment? I mean, or non-schemes, because obviously Outram isn't reticulated.
Mr. Chair, before the team answer, I've got an appointment to have stitches out of my sun-damaged nose at 11 o'clock. So if I could be excused when I think I can just about make that appointment. I'll leave very shortly.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. You go when you need to. It's important to get those stitches out and improve your return to your obvious good looks that aren't quite apparent at the moment.
Thank you.
Sorry, without some specificity, I'm not quite sure that it's going to get the focus for the infrastructure improvements that it requires, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I'm not sure where it relates. If it's Outram, that's a different solution to if it's Middlemarch or Allenton.
I guess I could answer that. I guess your question was whether there was any sort of specificity to those particular locations. I'm not sure if this will answer it, but we do have, when we've discussed this in the ISP, and we have, there are concerns not only for, I guess, council-owned networks, but also private systems as well, which does, so the concerns are across all the areas, I guess. Does that answer your question?
And that's absolutely fine, but in order to activate some actions into the infrastructure, we have to know where that is, and so Allenton doing a reticulated sewage system would be the sort of thing that you would see being potentially a solution for this. I didn't get that. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that was where that was sort of going. Sorry, did I say Allenton? No, I meant to say Outram. Yeah.
Commissioner, I think it's just a noting of concerns, particularly around some of the septic, the age and state of some of the septic tank, and monitoring, I guess, of some of the septic tank systems, rather than being a push for, say, extension to those areas that aren't reticulated.
So I've just got a couple of very specific questions for you regarding the issues that have been addressed so far. So Michael, have you got the draft FDS available to you? Can you turn to page 122, which is table 18.3? Now, I just want to confirm what I think I understand to be the request before us. So you see there's a row there that in the left-hand column has the words potable water, existing housing capacity bracket, and then potable water, iwi intent, community aspirations. And then there's a row that says serving assessment for Harrington Point, currently in the 1 to 10 year time frame. So are you asking that to be amended to the 1 to 3?
Correct.
And the next row down, options analysis, also 1 to 10. Would you like to see that also 1 to 3?
Yeah, also correct.
Yeah, and then the next one down, provision. So actually providing the water supply, I think you've already clarified you'd like to see that and move down to 1 to 10.
Yeah, I think that's what Mr. Allison specified.
Yeah. And then my next questions, very similar questions for the row that in the left-hand column goes wastewater, iwi intent, community aspirations. So same questions, servicing assessment, move from 1 to 10 to 1 to 3.
Yes.
Options analysis, move from 1 to 10 to 1 to 3.
Yes.
And then provision, move from 10 to 3 to 1 to 10.
Yes, also.
Okay, so now the next question relates to table 19 on the very next page. And that relates to the Peninsula Connection Road Safety Project which I think is the one that particularly Edward was discussing, currently 10 to 30 years time frame, and I think you'd like to see that move to the 1 to 10.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to clarify with you, so thanks for that. And it's very good to hear that you're happy with the recommendations that the officers have made to us regarding the numerous other wording amendments that you sought to the more narrative provisions of the FDS, so that's good for us to know. So no more questions from me, but just a comment in terms of the development of Papakaianga on Māori-owned land and Māori reserves. I recently sat on the hearing panel for Rotorua's intensification planning instrument, and the issue of Papakaianga was one of the more significant issues addressed there. And as a result of that hearing process, the provisions for Papakaianga were liberalised quite significantly to better facilitate Papakaianga development, but also associated activities such as kura, health facilities, limited range of commercial activities. And so why I'm saying that, if you're looking for something, a precedent that you might want to look at going forward from a planning perspective, I'd recommend the Rotorua District Plan to you and the results from their IPI hearing process. All right, but other than that, no further questions from us.
Page 130, there's another set of tables that relate to what
Yeah, go Jim. Yep.
Oh, so it's 137. It's basically the same table set for the North Coast, because
Yep.
that other set was for the peninsula. And I'm looking specifically, so that's table 23 on page 137. The one I'm looking at there is address capacity constraints and water supply to Warrington, Waitati and Seacliff 10 to 30. Do you want that brought closer?
That would be really helpful.
It should be 1 to 10.
Yeah.
1 to 10 for that one. And again, the ordnance source for the Waikawaiti and Karatane water supplies is 10 to 30. So again, I assume you'd want that brought into 1 to 10 as well. Cool. Bruns Point is 1 to 10. The other ones, everything else is basically 1 to 10 on that list. And then coming over to the transport components, which is on the next page, and table 24. Almost everything there is on the 1 to 10 already. Do you see anything there that needs to be sped up faster than the 1 to 10?
So I guess the one that's not 1 to 10 is the cycling safety and accessibility improvements. And I know that I think the Runaka have had some conversations with the Dunedin Trails Trust, which I understand have been here to present to the hearing as well. And I think Runaka is very supportive of what they're promoting.
And I think it was bringing that into 1 to 10 for that.
Sorry, yeah, I think that would be supported.
Okay, that's it for me on that list.
Sorry, can I just check, going back to 137, thank you, Jim. I had thought the servicing, the wastewater servicing potentially was earlier, and that's in order to, but at the moment it says 1 to 10. I just want to check if it was going to be in comparison to the...
Are you looking at the last rows of the table there, in terms of the treatment plants, or...?
I think we've made it clear through the short-term consents that have come in on the Warrington one. When Runaka said yes to 10 years, they expect something operational within that 10 years. So it would make sense for assessments to be carried out at the start. Yeah, yes.
Sorry, Kate, just some, which row in 23.3 was that one? I just couldn't follow.
I was talking about the Puketeraki, Bruns Point and Waitati. The problem is if everything in those top three...
Sorry, I understand the issue, but just which row is it? What are the words?
The servicing assessment,
there's a number of serving assessments there. Is it the Bruns Point one? Or
Puketeraki, Bruns Point on page 137.
So it's the fifth row up from the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay, that one.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. That's all. Yep, good.
Sorry, and there is going back to the last question I raised, which was about the tari. I was wondering whether my question would have been better to have the community and whether the words needed to change to include iwi aspirations and would have dealt with that better on page 113. At the moment it's wastewater community aspirations for upgrades in the Outram and Middlemarch area, but actually I think that the inclusion of that separate paragraph actually adds to iwi aspirations to get those sorted as well.
So you're suggesting that there needs to be a paragraph added?
Sorry, going to...
Sorry, Kate, microphone.
There's an extra paragraph in the officer's report suggesting that, because of a submission from you, asking for an extra paragraph sorting out discharges with potential to enter into the Tairu River. That would then mean that your aspirations should also be noted in the wastewater community. At the moment it's just community aspirations for improvements to the Outram and Middlemarch, but that would be consistent with iwi aspirations as well, to get those things improved, I think. So I was just noting that.
Yes, I think that's correct, but so there could be some missing text from that part of the document.
Yeah, Tim.
I'm back to the table 23 again on 137, and I'm just looking at the wastewater activities going out. And it occurs to me that what is not in that is what's in the ISP at the moment, which is there going to be a single wastewater treatment plant for the area, or is there going to be upgrades and replacement of the existing plants? There doesn't seem to be a time frame for a full systems planning for the Waikawaiti coast. And I'm kind of thinking that probably needs to be in there, so I'm just wondering what your thoughts would be.
I think we definitely have to reach that decision, but we haven't yet. So I know that the ISP has come up with some, like I said before, the long-term options. We haven't actually gone into identifying what that would be, because I understand there are several technical difficulties to get around, whether we'd have to extend the pipe for how many meters, and whether the preference is to have one massive plant or just the medium-sized plants for each locale. We haven't actually reached.
Yeah, I agree, we haven't, but that actual activity is not on the table. And so it needs to be on the table, and it probably does need to deliver in the next 1 to 3 years, a master plan.
So options. So it's like telephone tennis. So we're having options analysis for those replacement of those plants should be a row in the table as well within 1 to 3 years. Is that what you are suggesting?
Analysis for future wastewater plants, 1 to 3 years. Thank you.
Right, that's all very helpful. So I'll just check. I think that's the end of our questions for you. So again, just thank you very much for coming in, your initial presentations, and also for answering our questions. Obviously, we'll be giving these issues some pretty serious consideration in our deliberations, and you'll see the results of that in due course. So I was going to ask you to close with the karakia, but there are some issues I just want to address with the officers as well as part of this morning's proceedings. So is it appropriate for you to finish your presentation now, or would we have Hawani do that once we've finished other business?
Kia ora tātou, mihi nui kia koe I te hiamana. I will utter a karakia then, and there's some tautoko behind us as well, I think. Kia tau ke tātou katoa, te arwha atua tātou riki ki raiti, me te aroa te atua me whiwhi tangatanga waira tapu ake, āmene. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you. So you can either stay or go, up to you now, but we're going to move on to other matters just briefly. So to the panel, I just wanted you to note, if you haven't already noted, that we've been receiving some end of hearing supporting documents from the officers. So we have a response memo from Three Waters. We have supplementary evidence from Rodney Yeoman. And we have post-hearing engineering advice from the Otago Regional Council. Just want to check, has any other documents come in? So Emma, is there going to be any other supporting documents provided to us prior to us hearing from you this afternoon?
No other supporting documents. We will be producing a large table of responses to individual submitters. But it'd be really helpful if you're able to pre-read the ones that have been circulated so that those experts don't need to read and can just answer questions.
Yeah.
So save some time, thanks.
No, I agree. So that was going to be my next question for the panel. Obviously, we do have quite a large break now between now and 1:30. Hopefully you don't have other business you need to attend to, and we can read those three documents prior to hearing from the officers at 1:30. All right, so with that, we'll now adjourn this part of the hearing, reconvene at 1:30, and maybe panel members, if we could just retire to our little room out there, and we can just briefly talk about how we might want to run the deliberations tomorrow and Friday. Thank you.